The morning sun rose slowly over the dusty plains of Kansas, casting long golden rays across fields that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The air was crisp, the scent of freshly turned soil mixing with the faint aroma of dew-soaked wheat. In the middle of that vast farmland stood a man, tall, lean, sunburned, with a face weathered by time and toil. His name was Samuel Carter. To most, he was just another farmer in the American heartland. But in time, history would remember him as the man who fed the world. Samuel had been born on that very farm in 1972, the third generation of Carters who had worked that same soil. His father, a quiet and steady man, had taught him everything about the land they went to plant, how to read the clouds, when to wait and when to trust his instincts. But what his father couldn't teach him was how to survive in a world that was changing faster than anyone could imagine. By the time Samuel turned 30, the world was already shifting. Climate patterns became unpredictable, droughts more frequent, and storms more destructive. Farming was no longer a simple life, it was a gamble with nature. He watched neighbors sell their land, unable to pay debts as crops failed year after year. Still, Samuel stayed. The world will always need food, his father had told him before he passed. And someone's gotta grow it. Those words became Samuel's creed. His wife, Mary, stood by him through every hardship. She ran the farm's books, sold produce at local markets, and raised their two children, Emily and Jack. Together, they lived modestly but with purpose. Samuel wasn't content with just surviving. He wanted to find a way to make farming sustainable, not just for himself, but for everyone. In 2005, after another devastating drought, Samuel realized something had to change. The old ways weren't working anymore. He began reading everything he could about new agricultural techniques, hydroponics, vertical farming, genetic engineering. He saved up to attend an agricultural conference in Iowa, where scientists and innovators gathered to discuss the future of food. There, Samuel met Dr. Aisha Khan, a soil biologist from Pakistan working on drought-resistant crop strains. She spoke passionately about her work, and Samuel felt a spark ignite inside him. After the conference, Samuel wrote to her, sharing his challenges and asking if she'd collaborate with him to test her crops on his land. To his surprise, she agreed. Within months, small packets of experimental seeds arrived at his farm, grains modified to survive extreme heat and low rainfall. Samuel planted them in a small test field, unsure if they would even sprout. Weeks passed. While his traditional crops withered in the dry wind, the test field remained green. Samuel knelt in the dirt one evening, running his hands through the thriving plants, his heart pounding. It was the first real sign of hope in years. He wrote back to Dr. Khan, documenting every detail of his experiment. She responded enthusiastically, and soon their correspondence became a partnership that bridged continents. For the next few years, Samuel dedicated himself to perfecting what he and Dr. Khan called resilient farming. They experimented with soil microbes that enriched the land naturally, reducing the need for synthetic fertilizers. They tested crop rotations that restored nutrients instead of depleting them. Bit by bit, Samuel's small Kansas farm became a model of sustainable agriculture. Word spread. Local farmers visited to see what he was doing. Some called him crazy, others were curious. When they saw his yields during dry seasons, they began asking questions. Samuel never hoarded knowledge, he shared it freely. He hosted workshops in his barn, teaching others what he had learned. If we don't help each other, he'd tell them, we all go hungry. By 2015, global food shortages were making headlines. In parts of Africa and Asia, millions faced hunger as traditional crops failed. Governments and NGOs searched desperately for solutions. That's when Samuel's work caught the attention of the World Agriculture Council. They sent a delegation to his farm, and after touring his fields, they invited him to speak at an international summit in Geneva. Samuel had never been on an airplane before. When he stepped onto the stage, wearing his simple brown jacket and holding his old farmer's hat, he looked out at a sea of scientists, ministers, and journalists. He cleared his throat and said, "I'm just a farmer from Kansas. I don't have fancy words, but I do have something that works." He showed pictures of his fields, data from his experiments, and shared stories of neighbors who had adopted his methods. His speech wasn't technical, it was heartfelt. He spoke about respecting the land, about working with nature instead of against it. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause, not polite or brief, but thunderous. That moment changed everything. Funding poured in to expand his work globally. Samuel refused to take personal profit. Instead, he founded a non-profit organization called Harvest Hope, dedicated to training farmers worldwide in sustainable, resilient agriculture. He traveled from deserts in Africa to flood-prone areas in Southeast Asia, helping communities adapt to a changing climate. In Kenya, he worked with women farmers to build solar-powered irrigation systems. In India, he collaborated with local cooperatives to plant salt-resistant rice. In South America, he introduced microbe-rich composting that revived barren soil. Everywhere he went, he wore his faded Kansas cap and called people by their first names. "We're all farmers," he'd say. "We're all feeding someone." But success brought challenges too. Agribusiness giants began seeing his work as a threat. His focus on open-source farming and sharing methods freely without patents clashed with corporate interests. Lobbyists accused him of undermining the global food economy. Reporters tried to dig up dirt, painting him as Nitel de Macranvi. But Samuel didn't fight back with anger. He simply kept farming, kept teaching, and let the results speak for themselves. In 2023, disaster struck. A record-breaking heat wave swept across North America, killing crops across vast regions. Millions faced shortages, and food prices soared. Samuel's own fields suffered too, but his resilient crops survived where others failed. When global leaders gathered in emergency meetings, they turned to him once again. He proposed a radical idea, a global farmers' network where nations shared seeds, data, and technology freely. No patents, no borders, he said, just food. It was met with skepticism at first, but hunger has a way of changing minds. Within a year, the Global Harvest Network was born, uniting farmers from over 50 countries. Samuel's vision was becoming reality. Through it all, Samuel remained humble. He still woke before dawn, still worked the soil with his hands. He still ate breakfast with Mary in their small kitchen, the smell of coffee and toast filling the room. His children had grown. Emily became an environmental engineer, Jack a journalist documenting agricultural stories. They often told him he was changing the world, but he'd just smile and say, "I'm only feeding it." As he aged, his hair turned white, his steps slower, but his spirit never waned. One morning, in the soft glow of sunrise, Samuel stood in his field once more. The wind rustled through rows of golden grain, and in that sound, he heard the laughter of generations as father, his children, and the countless farmers around the world who had joined his cause. He thought about all the letters he had received of photos of African villages once barren, new full of green life, stories from children who no longer went to bed hungry, and notes from farmers who said, "You gave us hope." Tears filled his eyes as he realized the magnitude of it all. In 2030, the United Nations awarded him the Global Humanitarian Medal. The ceremony was grand, but Samuel remained the same. When they handed him the microphone, he looked at the crowd and said, "You can't eat money, and you can't drink oil, but if we take care of the land, it'll take care of us." That's all I ever did. He passed away peacefully 5 years later, in the same farmhouse where he was born. On the day of his funeral, farmers across the world stopped their work for 1 minute of silence. From the rice paddies of Vietnam to the wheat fields of Canada, from African villages to European valleys, people stood in their fields and bowed their heads to honor the man who had fed the world. But his legacy didn't end there. Harvest Hope continued to grow, training millions of new farmers. His teachings became standard in agricultural schools. His simple motto, respect the land, and it will feed you, was engraved on a plaque outside the United Nations headquarters. Years later, a young girl in Ethiopia visited one of the farms Samuel had helped establish. She asked her teacher, "Who was this man?" The teacher smiled and replied, "He was a farmer who believed that one person, with enough faith in the soil, could change everything." The girl knelt down, scooped a handful of rich, dark earth into her hands, and whispered, "Thank you." And somewhere, perhaps in the eternal rhythm of wind and wheat, Samuel Carter's spirit smiled content, knowing that his fields, and his dream, would never die. He was not a politician, nor a scientist, nor a billionaire. He was something far greater, a farmer who fed the world.